Mark Twain. So the notion that people have, or had that I wasn't supposed to be here today, I was supposed to be on my way to Israel, doesn't happen until next Sunday. And it doesn't happen until after services Sunday night. So I'll be here all day tomorrow. The only Sunday I'm actually missing is in 2 weeks. I'll be back the next Sunday. I'll be teaching the class when I get back, but I won't be up there during the service. But I know, I haven't turned it on yet because I haven't said anything worthwhile. All right, pretty soon the volume's going to come up. I don't hear it because I haven't turned it on yet. Okay, there we go. All right, so we are on question 9 of Acts 27 this morning. And let's see, I'll see what I'm... You can take me all the way to slide 11 if you want. That will be the last one that we'll be on. All right. Let's go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you so very much for the good morning, the blessing of this day, and the presence of each one with us today, and those who are joining us on Zoom. You just provide all the things that we need in this life and bless us so richly. We're thankful for times like this where we can open your word together without fear and study it, find the messages and truths that you've left there for us so that we can be encouraged and edified and then share that with others. We pray your presence with us and give us understanding is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. There you are. I was looking for, I saw Mary Carter walk in this morning and then she disappeared. So we're so glad to have her. Michaela, welcome back. And the rest of you, great. Glad you're here. I'm glad that Dawn's able to be with us today. The little bulletin insert I did for the third time and the second time today. The first, I woke up this morning and thought, I forgot to put Elizabeth's and Christina's baptism in the bulletin. So I came back down here and finished that. And then Tim shows me the travelers, and it said, Dawn Fires will leave, and then F, and then some other symbols. And I thought, what is that? So I had to correct that too. So if you've got a copy that's got all of it in there, you got the third and final edition of that. So they are in Fair Havens. Let me get a... Let's see what the next one is. Did we look at these boats? Did you see those? Yeah, because I told you that guy must be about 30 feet tall. Okay, so they're at Fair Havens. I talked about the fact that the winds come across Crete, hurricane force. Euroclydon is what the Greek word up there says, and Euro means north, and Clydon is east. So it's a nor'easter, like you have in Maine. And so they're in Fair Havens, which is right there, and they're wanting to get to Phoenix. And they would just hug the coast to get there. And so they're trying to decide what to do there in Fair Havens, is where we are now. And so as they're having this conference that Paul has been invited to, and he makes the statement, man, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship, cargo, and to our lives as well, which is an educated guess on his part. He's not prophesying here. In fact, when he does prophesy later on, he's going to say, the Lord told me this. So he gives his advice. We've talked about the fact that he's been on the sea a lot. And so actually the word is what's called, technically it's called a circumscribed future. which means that here's the future and it's got a circle around it. This is what I think is going to happen. So did the centurion listen? Why or why not? Question 9. Otto?
He did not listen, and it was probably because he trusted the guy that sails all the time and didn't know all about Paul's background.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? And see, my answer was yes, he did listen, but not to Paul. Who he listened to, as Otto said, was the captain. And it may be that since he's an imperial centurion, and that Rome has power with regards to the use of these ships. It's like they've leased them, it's theirs. The owners are making great money off the Roman government. And in fact, the ship may have been privately owned, but leased by that. And with his number of prisoners, 276 passengers altogether, so, maybe 100 prisoners, I don't know. The payment for whose passage came from Rome. Perhaps he had veto power with regards to the final decision as to whether or not they went. And so again, as Otto said, he decided to follow the advice of the pilot, the navigator, and the captain or owner. He trusted their expertise. And if you're a centurion and you've got over 100 prisoners on your hands, what are you anxious to do? Get rid of them. Deliver them and be done with it. Plus, if you remember back in verse 12, the harbor is unsuitable to winter in. They just cannot stay here. And that's where I had the previous slide there. You can see where they are. The winds are going to just be murderous for them. And maybe I had it. There it is. So they resolved to try to make it to Phoenix, which is 40 miles to the west. And this is a harbor in Crete that faces both, according to the text, southwest and northwest. And you look at the Greek on that and you look at commentaries on that, and people really aren't sure how to understand that. I was trying to describe it to somebody else. To me, it's like Westport and Ilwaco. They face, the ports face, they have almost the same opening, but they face different directions. And so this is a picture of that harbor in Phoenix. This is a picture that was taken by Farrell Jenkins. I guess he probably climbed up on that rock to take it. But still not the best protection from the weather, but better than where they are now. Now, in hindsight, chances are they would have been better off to stay where they were, as we know what's going to happen further on. So any comments on the centurion? Okay, so why did they leave the harbor and what occurred? Why did they leave Fair Havens? Pardon me? Yeah, because they really didn't have any choice. They felt they had no choice. And as we said before, this harbor is unsuitable. And they said, but why they left when they actually did is hang on, it'll come to me. Gwen said, we have now a gentle wind blowing from the south. Oh, doesn't that sound nice? A gentle wind blowing from the south. And listen again, I'll just remind you, winds are identified by the direction from which they come. So a nor'easter is a wind out of the northeast. And at this time of year, a south wind would indicate pleasant and safe sailing. They could reach it in one day. I mean, 40 miles is no big deal for a boat to make it in 24 hours. I mean, and they're going to be hugging the coast. I mean, everything fits for them to leave. So what occurred? Tammy?
I was kind of back up.
Okay, go ahead.
This time of year, that would be like a Serato, even though it's gentle, which tends to last for days.
Yeah, okay. So a sirocco wind, which is a southern wind, a warm wind, can last for a long time, Tammy told us. So what happened then after this? So they left Fair Havens, heading for Phoenix. Okay, so, and when did that happen? Yeah, they just left. They had just left. After traveling a short distance. My version says in verse 14, before very long. Okay? So some have suggested that they sailed past Cape Matala, which is, so Fair Havens is right in here. This is a more modern day map with cities. So they just sailed right around this little point here, and then boom, it comes this wind out of the north, and again I'll show you that wind tunnel. That's my own wind. Can you tell? It's not quite as powerful as the one you saw before. And it's a wind of hurricane force. The Greek word is tuphonikos, from which we probably get the word typhoon. By the way, let me share something with you here. In my Sunday night class, which is the same class with different people, Doug Ward, who is Melissa's husband, who's in Maryland, he was really glad I got done with class a little early because it was before 10 o'clock when we were done with class his time. And he's been on the Mediterranean in the wintertime on a big ship. And he said the seas are 40 feet. And it's horrible. I mean, and with boats as modern and with navigation and huge as we have, they still don't like to sail during that time of year. And then when he told me that, I can remember my dad, who was stationed in the Philippines and Australia in World War II. He said he can remember being in a convoy and in rough seas like that and see the ship in front come clear out. He could see the screw on the big ship in front of him out of the water. And they're down in this trough and then go like that, and they couldn't even see the ship anymore. And so that's the kind of picture I want you to get that they're in. And this is no tiny ship. I mean, it's 150, 180 feet long. But it's the Greek word tuphonikos means violent, stormy, tempestuous. And in describing the wind, it's anemos. And again, this particular wind is Euroclydon. Euros, eastern, and Clydon, northern. So it's a nor'easter. They occur between September and April. And listen, nor'easters are so violent in our part of the country. What else is named a nor'easter? Any of you ever heard of the rain gear, the coats? You know, you have to wear your nor'easter because to stay dry. That's how well known they are. Tim.
I just happened to think of this just because I saw it this morning, and I just found it interesting. The Roman Empire on this map that I saw was placed over the United States.
Yeah.
So I just found it interesting that like Palestine or the area they would have left was about like Macon, Georgia.
Right.
And Rome was like Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Right.
So if that gives you a kind of a scale.
Gives you a sense of the scale of the. It's not large. To me, it's like when I travel back east, I'm so excited because you go from state to state in about 5 minutes, you know. And here, you know, they go to Oregon and then you go to California, way down. I mean, it's so ours are so spread out and bigger. And there, you know, you say, oh, we're going to go into a new state. Yeah, we did that 5 minutes ago. Here we are again. You know, it's just quick. And so it's not a huge geographic area here. And so the wind came sweeping down, and that's probably what I just had. Let's see. And blew them off course. There we go. And basically, because ancient ships weren't equipped to sail into the wind, not winds like this. They gave way to it. So they just turned and went with it and are now being driven by the wind. And I would assume as well, they're not just being driven, they've taken down a lot of their sails just to keep from snapping masts, just enough to keep going in the right direction. But they are at the mercy of the wind. And as you can see, there are no harbors out where we're going here. And they're being blown into the open Mediterranean. Any other comments on that or questions? So describe the efforts of the crew to save the ship in verses 16 through 19. There's 5 things that they did.
Lighten it?
Pardon me?
Did they lighten it?
They will eventually. First thing they did, and I think that, yes, there it is. They sailed under Clauda or Cauda, depending on what your translation is. They got in behind, so Clauda is between them and the horrible wind. It'd be like, this event here is like you're in a driving rainstorm in Texas, and you go under an overpass. So you have this moment when you don't have any rain. Or if it's a big hailstorm, when you go into a hailstorm down in the south and there, hailstones this big, the overpasses are crowded with people who are stuck in there to keep from being hit by the hailstones. That's kind of what Claudia is, except they can't park. They have an ability to park here in the lee of this, but they're going to take advantage of that. And what is the first thing that says they did? So they secured the little dinghy that they're pulling behind it. So on this, there I even pointed out with my big arrow, you can see the little dinghy that's tied on the deck there. That's their little lifeboat, the one. But it's actually not a lifeboat. They're using that for other purposes around the boat, and we'll see that in a few minutes. Most Roman merchants towed one of these boats behind the ship because they didn't want it on deck, because what are they carrying on deck? People and cargo, and that would take up a bunch of room. Think about trying to pull this little lifeboat up onto the deck with driving winds and rain. The lifeboat probably has what in it? Water. And so it's heavy. And I can't even imagine the difficulty it would have been. And I like the fact that it says, verse 16, as we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, as in mine, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. What pronoun is used? We. What does that say? Luke is helping. They're all helping. They're all became sailors today. And so he's helping out with that. And I can just see him as he's writing, remembering the blisters that he got on his little surgical hands and writing hand. He's not used to this kind of labor. What's the second thing they did?
Girded the ship with cables.
Okay, so and that process is called frapped, F-R-A-P-P-E-D. They frapped the boat by passing cables underneath it and actually tying them together to hold the hull together. Remember, this is all wood and put together with, I don't know, tar and wooden pegs or maybe some iron nails. And so it would be the best thing I can suggest you to think of. It's like putting barrel rings around a barrel, around the staves to hold them together. And so that's what they're doing as well. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a fairly big storm on a smaller boat. I mean, when I used to go out with my friend George on his fishing boat, and it's a 20-foot boat, and it's really good for, it's very seaworthy. But I can remember going, especially like crossing the bar, and we go up, and I remember one particular time because he dropped something, and I bent over I was on the seat next to where he was steering, and I bent over to pick up this thing, and we hit the top, and we came down on the other side, just bam! I mean, I cracked a rib on my knee because I went like that at the same time. I went to the doctor, and he said, oh yeah, you got a bad contusion there. And so think of a wooden boat that's maybe 20-foot waves and coming down hard like that. Yeah, you want to tie it together so that it stays together. And I tried to find an illustration of frapping a boat, and I couldn't, so you'll have to just let your imagination work with what I said. Yes?
Can you imagine what a job that had to have been to pass that cable under?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know how they did it, unless they had to skip back in the water and
What I would imagine is they went to the bow on either side, dropped it down, and came back with it, and then tied it together.
they had to go around all the little
Yeah,
superstructures on
yeah,
there too.
yeah,
So-
yeah. Next thing. No. They lowered the gear, either the mainsail or some of your translations say the sea anchor. The Greek word means gear, so either one of those could be acceptable. I think they'd already lowered most of the sails to keep the mast from breaking, but they could have used one of the sails out the back for a sea anchor, and this is kind of what they do with that, and it keeps the boat pointed toward into the wind and away from the direction, so it slows them down. So you could use a mainsail for that. You could just put it and tie it off, and it kinds of a drag on them. Yes, and it keeps the boat oriented into the face of the storm. And this was done why? What does the text say?
To prevent them from running aground on sandbars,
Okay, is that what your translation actually says?
fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis sandbar.
Okay, the Syrtis, the sandbars of Syrtis. The sandbars of Syrtis, and I think I have there's the greater Syrtis and the lesser Syrtis and the Syrtis rise or Syrti rise. Syrtis is obviously plural. Syrtis was a treacherous area off of the coast of North Africa, in which ships could flounder. The seas themselves are choked with seaweed because they're so shallow there, and once beyond the sandbar, returning to the open sea it's not going to happen. And accordingly, there's also dangerous rocks. So I don't know. I had another slide. What do you know? What slide I'm on, Tim?
What number is that?
16 or 17?
Well, the next slide is Malta. I can't find it.
Let me see if I have. I'm not going to have another slide.
This is 18, I'm sorry.
This is 18?
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the right place.
Okay, well, that's where I was supposed to stay. It doesn't matter, I'm going to leave that there. Listen, Syrtis was so dreaded that it was an expression used often among poets of dangers. And so the ship would have been laid to, which means facing the wind, leaning slightly starboard from what I could find, so their speed would be about 3/4 to 2 miles an hour. And listen, you think about that. Well, at that speed, they're going to go 36 miles a day at that slow speed, which would mean that they are going to go 480 miles in 13 days, which is about how far it is to Malta. So Luke's words here, as far as how long and they've been out and what days, pretty accurate. As I told you at the beginning of this chapter, this is a very accurate depiction of a ship in a storm by someone who is there who is not a sailor. So what's the fourth thing they did, Jeannie? Yes, they jettisoned the cargo, some of the cargo. And Luke's not specific, what cargo would be probably the first to go as far as location?
Heavy stuff on the deck.
Everything on the deck, because you want the weight in the bottom for ballast to keep the ship as upright as you can. So the stuff on top is the supercargo. I always thought a supercargo ship was a super cargo ship, you know, and it's not. It's a ship that's cargo is on top, and so it's the supercargo. Yes.
And for as many tons as that ship might be, it is still at the mercy of the wind.
Yes.
Just because it's a big wall.
Yeah, exactly. We know all of it wasn't wheat, because that's going to go later, and that may have very well been in the bottom anyway. But in verse 38, it says they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. So we haven't gotten to that point yet. So all the cargo, I think, lashed to the deck is jettisoned. And then the fifth thing they did on the third day, what's that? Pardon me? Yeah, they got rid of the ship's tackle. And again, Luke, we got rid of the ship's tackle. So don't think about the ship's tackle, though, as being, well, number one, fishing tackle. That's what we usually think of. Oh, they got rid of all the hooks and poles and rods and all that. Man, what a waste. This would be spare sails, furniture, tables, chests, anything that was not absolutely necessary for sailing, for controlling the ship. I know when we get to verse 29, they still have 4 anchors. I know in verse 40, they're going to hoist the mainsail. So when it says they got rid of the tackle, don't think that they just stripped this boat bare. They still have things that are important and necessary. So the masts are still there, obviously. The spars are still in place. And again, the ship is still being controlled to the best of their ability. They're still in control of the ship, at least as far as keeping it from sinking. Okay, so those are the 5 steps that they took. And again, Luke in Asia Minor wouldn't have a slice idea of what all of this is, except he's on the boat. He knows exactly what's going on. Otto?
You know this, however you pronounce it, Sardis Straits? I did a little reading on that, and to me, they were so, usually when a ship got in there, they never got out. And the ship would sink and everybody on board would be lost.
Right.
And I kind of equated that to the same thing that we hear today about the Bermuda Triangle.
Right.
People disappear.
Yeah.
And it was pretty interesting to read about.
Right. Well, and even, I was surprised to read that Josephus had been in a similar shipwreck, and out of the 600 people, only 80 survived, and he was one of them. All right, question 12. What caused them to, quote, give up all hope of being saved, end quote, from verse 20? Okay, so the sun and no sun, no stars appeared for many days. And how many days was that? Well, verse 27 says the 14th night they were still being driven, so that's 2 weeks. And again, it's not that they couldn't tell day and night. I mean, I don't care how cloudy it is and stormy it is, and it may be dark. It's not night. It's not like there's no sun. There's still some light that's going to filter through. But they can't tell where they are. When the sun comes up, they don't know which direction east and west are. And they certainly don't have any stars. Listen, sextants, if you're thinking of somebody trying to use a sextant, we're 1,700 years from the time that's going to be invented. The compass actually was invented 200 years before this, but it was invented in China. And it's not going to be seen in this culture for another 1,000 years. So they can use the North Star, they can know the sun goes this way, and get a kind of an idea. But listen, most ships Listen, if you're going from Alexandria down here that we pointed out where Alexandria was, and you're going to, going to Malta, or where they got this boat in, is it Myra that they picked up the boat from Alexandria? If you're going straight north, all you have to know is the sun going this way, and you just keep track, okay, we're good, okay, we're still going good, the sun's going right over the top of us, and you can navigate with just the sun north and south. But most of these ships did not go in the open sea. They were coastal boats. They sailed around with land in sight. And when we used to, again, go salmon fishing out of Westport, or even, and not so much halibut fishing because we did that up in the Straits, but you get out 20 miles, you don't see any land. You have any idea where you are, without the maps and all of the GPS stuff that we have now. So they really don't know where they are going, and they can't tell east from west and north from south. And all of that time, all of these days, 2 weeks almost, the storm is still raging. I can't even imagine that. Have you checked the water, Sam? I remember one time we had water coming right over the edge. I just heard it.
Good call.
Thank you.
It's not there, but it might be dripping.
And what is happening to them, the danger of navigating this time, listen, we already talked about the fact there was very definite sailing times, and you didn't sail between November and April, or March 10th. And so they know they shouldn't be out there. And the other thing about all of this, what causing them to give up hope, is what haven't they done during this time? They haven't eaten. They may have caught a bite here or there, but they haven't. And unless you are a seasoned sailor, which I'm assuming that a lot of them, especially prisoners, were not, they're feeding the fish whatever food they have. And they're not, and when you're nauseated like that, you're not wanting to eat. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. I remember the first time that I went salmon fishing, but for whatever reason, I didn't get sick, and I ate everybody's lunch. They all bought lunch, and they're just sitting there, and they said, "Have it," and I ate it. And I was, 18 years old and had a hollow leg. And of course, I shared this with you too. Got home, my dad, who's in the Navy, and I said, Dad, I didn't get seasick. He said, "Son, I've squeezed more salt water out of my socks than you saw today." And it is, can't let anybody get the big head. That was my dad's motto. So they've gone a long time without food. Listen, there's no way to prepare it. How could you cook it even? It's like the difference, I guess the difference for what these guys are mostly used to and what's happening here is the difference between sailing in Puget Sound and going out in the ocean. Sailing in Puget Sound is a piece of cake. It's just, you may get some waves, but it's not anything like this. And so their food is the last thing on their minds, and they're growing weak. And when you grow weak, then you lose hope. And some have suggested here that Luke uses saved, or uses that word in the sense that when they gave up hope of being saved, that it's in some sort of sense of the rescue of their souls, and that's pushing it too much. They don't see any hope of surviving this event. All right, question 13. What did Paul say to everyone on board ship in verses 21 through 26? Pardon me? Yeah, that's what everybody points out. So here's the midst of this crisis of despair that's been going on for a couple of weeks, and Paul steps forward and stood up. And I'm not sure what that looks like. It's not like he's got a podium on the deck, So I don't know how he has all of these people. I know they're all up there, and I don't know how he did that. Here you are in a driving storm, rain and wind, not a situation for an oratory speech, you know, raising his hand to get everybody's attention, you know, like he did on the steps of the temple that time. But in some way, he's able to communicate with them all. And I don't know if God's help wasn't with that in magnifying his voice and so that they could all hear what he's saying in the midst of this storm. Yes?
At that point, they were probably all just on deck, just because they didn't want to get trapped below deck.
Yeah.
The ship sank.
Yeah. So up to this point in Luke's narrative of Acts, we've seen Paul as the apostle of the Gentiles and a pioneer missionary on 3 different journeys. And we've seen him as a prisoner and a defendant. And now it just appears that Paul is just a man among all of these men who has something to say, who is a believer in the God of heaven. Who else would be believers on this boat? Luke and Aristarchus. That's it. That would probably be all of them. And so out of nearly 300 men, most of whom are prisoners and soldiers, but again, Paul is a seasoned seafarer, counting all, and I think I mentioned this, counting all of his journeys that he made in a boat, he's traveled some 3,500 miles on the water with all of his journeys. But what gives him his confidence in this particular case is his faith. And getting back to Don's comment, I've never before been sure of what to make of "I told you so." You should have listened to me as I recommended. And I've come to the point that I don't think it is as petty as we would be. I told you so. I mean, that's not going to garner you the attention and love of the people that you're talking to. So I think it went deeper than that. And instead of "I told you before" and "us," which I've done. Listen, up until this time I'm teaching Acts. If you look at my old notes, you know, I was going to say "I told you so." But instead of looking at that from Paul's point of view, looking back, I want you to say, now I want you to believe what I'm going to say looking forward. The only reason he's using that is to give credence to what he's going to tell them is going to happen. And to give them confidence and faith in their future. And so what I said before you rejected, it was true. So here's this. Rather than pouring salt in their wound, he's giving them a foundation for hope of what's going to occur. And I like that a lot better. Yes.
You know, excuse me, in the same light, he could be saying, as I've told you other things about the Messiah, and now I'm going to tell you more, maybe now you'll
Yeah.
listen to that.
That's right. Exactly. And so here's what he said. What's the first thing he said? Keep up your courage. Because what did we just say? They'd lost all their hope. And Paul's telling them, not one of you is going to be lost. And again, he's not talking about eternity here. He's talking about their earthly lives. And I don't have any record here of any scoffers. If any said, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. We're all going to die. I'm dying, you're dying, we're all dying. That kind of a thing there. Because, listen, when you have lost all hope and someone gives you a sliver, what are you going to do? You're going to grab it. You're going to grab it. It's going to be welcomed. And so you have Paul's confidence and you have a double confession here in verse 23. Last night, an angel of the Lord who's of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood before me. And then verse 25, so keep your courage, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. And I'm sure that helped. But there's a proviso to that. What does he say is going to happen? Well, even before that, the ship is going to be lost. Which may seem like a contradiction. How can we all be saved and the ship be lost? Most people didn't know how to swim. Did you know that the British Navy never taught its sailors to swim? Ever. In the time of, is it Cornwallis? No, it was Trafalgar named after the
Lord
Nelson.
Nelson.
The guys in the British Navy during that time were never taught to swim. You know why? They wanted them to stay on the boat. They wanted the water to be more fearful than anything they were facing. And so they didn't teach them to swim. And so that kept them on the boat. But here is why. Because an angel of the God I serve stood before me and told me this. Don't be afraid. Chapter 23 and verse 1. The Lord told Paul, don't be afraid. You're going to appear before Caesar. So that's been in Paul. That's Paul's little lifesaver thing that he's had in his heart all of this time. It's actually 23 and verse 11. And so he knew this, but God is a gracious God who reminds people. And God had already told him you're going to appear before Caesar. Now he's going to be told again. And along with that, along with the grace of God making sure Paul gets before Caesar, God throws in everybody else on the ship is going to be saved. So keep your courage, men. I believe in God that it will happen just as he said. And then he says, now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to run aground on some island. And literally it means we're going to be cast upon some island. But sandwiched in between this is God's grace is seen between the initial warning and the fear and this hope. All right. So I think we'll stop there. We'll talk about what happened on the 14th night. Question 14. I believe that I sent out the notes for chapter 28. I have no hope that we're going to be in chapter 28 next week. But I think we've got someone who's going to teach Acts while I'm gone. It'll be taught, those of you who are Zooming, it will be taught Sunday morning, but not Sunday night. And when I send out the invitations, there won't be an Acts class next Sunday night at 6 o'clock. And then, no, there won't be, because I'm leaving right after services. And then the next Sunday, it'll also be just Acts class Sunday morning. And then when I get back, we'll do the both again. Any questions or comments? Are you feeling a little seasick after our class today? Pretty amazing stuff, pretty detailed. All right, thank you very much for your attention.